It's Thursday, January 5th, 2023. I'm in this. Um, I, um, for Christmas, Lewis and Linda, had bought me something called a Fitbit. So now I'm monitoring my sleep cycles, which is an interesting new metric for patterns that I see. Um, in the dimension that my person wakes up in. I'm also reviewing where my body's been dragged through. I'm thinking, as far as House of Lords go, now that after the Queen Elizabeth's funeral, they mentioned that there is such a thing somewhere in the far, far away category from where my body sleeps and wakes. Um, and then there's this other integral timing piece of something else being House of August. So, and like, where do you go when you sleep? Last night I had 3 hours of REM, um, as a for instance. And there's been times where I'm in this REM state, which they classify as rapid eye movement. And I I know I'm in this quantum state of a different reality with this person that I've always referred to as Nikki, and I am happily where I belong. And then all of a sudden I get sucked back into this reality. Um, and then there's nobody. There's nobody and nothing. Um, for which I absolutely despise. Um, and that's been going on my entire arrival on this planet, being the third rock from the sun. Um, in ear things. So there's a portion of that. Then I'm looking at, I arrived and there was, in this neighborhood, while I'm in the brick house that my grandfather bought and provide shelter for Louis, Linda, and my arrival, Antonio Cattaruzza. He was October, so he's Anthony Octavia, and I am Augusta. Um, anyhow, so that's Cesar. So when I arrived, the children in this neighborhood were set up. There was a red-headed Jewish girl. There was a dark hair, I don't know what. And then there was, and she had olive coverings. And then she went to something called a Catholic school. So that gets confusing. Because she went to something called a St. Mary's, allegedly. My Michael, that grew up in a Glen, could confirm or deny that because he went to the same alleged school. I don't have access to him. And then there was, next door, there was a girl named Jenny who said she was something called a Korean. Those were the children I arrived to in this area, um, outside of the Glen. And then the dreams started happening of I would go to sleep, I would wake, and I would be so frightened of the future. I said, I don't know what, I don't know who. I said, and I have documents of pieces when I came to that I could recognize and tell the adults to warn them. Um, I'm assuming there was some kind of document collection. It went on file somewhere. I just don't know where. Um, then I was taken, we were allowed to move to the Glen. Somebody gave Lewis an opportunity and we moved to the Glen. Um, and while I was there, the dark hair, olive skinned or covered girl moved allegedly, supposedly, to a place where that was called New Hyde Park, North 4th. And she would phone the Glen. And then, with Lewis and Linda's permission, she's also the one who took me to Maine, Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, in a Crown Victoria, whatever that means. I don't think Judith was all right or happy with it, but Linda would not, whatever, listen. And so then there was this, one time she phoned about something called a block party. Did not know what that was. Apparently, the North 4th, FOURTH people had something where they closed their streets. They all set out tables and then they got a DJ and a blow up whatever, or just DJs, depending on the block and the year. And you walked around and got to meet the neighbors. So Maria, having my phone number, phoned the Glen, and I was her invitee to witness this type of common area exercise or operation or field event, I suppose. So I was young. I was not of driving age. And they requested my presence. Linda and Lou allowed me to go. And I met the neighbors of this person. Maria also, her father, Mike, worked for Trump. And she was dating something called a David Sexton. Now, Sexton, just so nobody gets all giggly, is a nautical measuring device when you're on a ship and you're trying to set a course. It's also the tool that the Masonics use with the symbol G for the builders and the architects of the nation, for presidents' ancestors in this area, for which I qualify. So I met this David Sexton. I could not believe he was dating Maria. That made no sense to me. But he also did not seem common school. I mean, he looked like a lawyer. He sounded and held himself in a different mannerism than the common area of a level of, say, New Hyde Park. I was at the Glen. He would have fit in at the Glen. But in the New Hyde Park crowd, it was definitely a different, noticeable difference. Um, and he was incredibly attractive, which was on like was rare, we'll call it. Um, so I'm thinking that was an interesting event. It was a block party in the common area. They dispatched a David Sexton at King David and his disciples or representatives in the field, and keeping an eye on one's own flock. And I don't know, again, in this area, the way that my Glen worked, it was a Shiloh shepherd with perhaps multiple representatives. I'm not clear. Um, but there was not one necessarily spoken of. I did meet another person called Erin Browning, um, and the Memorial Days were spent at Mohonk Mountain House for a few years in a row. And then while I was in the Glen, and then there was Mohonk, and then she requests, she was going to a sleepaway camp where I met a Raider representative with baseball cap. He gave me a Raiders baseball cap and he called himself Peachy. He was from Massachusetts, but we all gathered in New Hampshire. It was it was the it was some White Lodge hotel, an old antique hotel in New Hampshire, and it was Lake Winnipesaukee. And there were cabins up there by a lake, and it was the first sleepaway camp. And then I think the next year was Rhode Island, where I went to gymnast camp. Um, and I met other whatevers. Um, so there was, as a child, there was this sleep time where I woke up and I had to figure out a way to communicate things beyond the world that my body woke up in to the adults. I'm like, no, they look human where I go. They look human. They are just more advanced than we are. But they are, again, like they're my race. They're just more advanced. And again, I had to explain to Judy, I was like, the equipment that is coming, that is I'm most concerned about, you don't have it here. I said, how do I mean, I was only like 5. I'm like, how, Judy, do I explain to you this equipment and what it looks like? It looks like and then I had to go through shapes because I was only 5. There was no school at that point. I'm like, what shape is a cereal box? Whatever shape that is. And then smaller, but not as long. What shape is that? Do you have a different name for the one that has the same amount of sides? And she said square. I'm like, okay, so it's a rectangle with squares. And I took a crayon and I had to draw what I knew I saw in REM at nap time or sleep time. And then I woke up so like physically frightened of what was to come in my life frame, and how it might, like, I did not want to be trapped underneath this amount of problems, because it was just the small amount I was allowed to know about, but there was more under the surface that was even more frightening. And there were a lot of pieces into this. Um, but of course, in cosmic and spatial relation, and then having the future of my child, not only my future, but then the future of this child of August that I was to have in perfect symmetry. Um, so I know they dispatched like a King David. I have to assume it was a King David Sexton representative. I mean, knowing that there are advanced race beings, and then there's wherever I am at the moment. Um, so yesterday morning on See the BS, um, they acknowledged, they put up two outside leaders, and they called them, and the technology they called mass weapons of disruption instead of destruction. Destruction is a whole nother category. I mean, that's what I call the machina fumigation machines. Those are neuromotor toxin distributors. That frightens me on one level. But then there's this um, weapons of mass disruption, which is what now the technology is classified as, or they're speaking, giving words to. Um, so I'll mention that piece. Then now, when I went to Lake Winnipesaukee, we went, in a van. There were two leaders, and then there was the quiet. Well, then there was the people that they took out. We went on a special overnight camping trip with tents and with a bridge, and having a life vest on and jumping off this bridge, um, and having to rely on these leaders of this expedition and some form of trust in them, that we weren't going to die if we jumped off this bridge. Um, so there's that. And we went looking for moose. We were looking for moose so they could teach us about fauna and flora that was not indigenous to, well, for me it was Long Island. I don't have moose down here. Um, so that was important as well, on this northeast coast. This morning also, yesterday they had this mass disruptors, but today they have on some fight that's going on between, um, the two brother princes um, from England. Now, I don't know how, because nobody has, like, I mean, over here it's been like Shiloh speak. Um, but I know they exist. They've mentioned it on the TV that they exist. And they've, so, like, are they, if we're in some independence 1776 and have some army of 1775, are they the area managers or the territory managers? Because technically it's called New England. I mean, I don't know. I met an admirable once, very respectable, and I respected he. Um, but again, he was trying to speak to me of his importance, which I was very frightened of him, and well, not really frightened. Well, I was trying to follow along, and I wanted to be as respectable as possible, being that he was admirable, but not really knowing the words or what it looked like or what his expectation of me was. I made that clear. Um, so, and he knows who he was. Again, I can't remember the names. It was so long ago. And it was only this brief one fleeting moment. And then it's just, they just disappear. Oh, I mean, like, it's almost like they fall off the face of the earth. They fell off of my dimension. I don't know where they went. Um, so there's some fight going on, and I don't even know how to reference it properly because I don't even have the words. Um, I'm gonna go pull those up on the TV, but I'm still in this at the moment. So on Wednesday, it was CBS Mornings E3 for 2023. Um, it was January 4th. They had this on.
Shift topics now on something that will likely be on the minds of leaders across the globe. The biggest risks our world is facing in 2023. We're sharing a new list from the Eurasia Group, the political risk research and consulting firm. So at number 3, what they call weapons of mass disruption. That is technology like artificial intelligence that can undermine trust and democracy. At number 2, maximum Xi. They say Chinese leader Xi's unrivaled power in his own country could lead to dangerous mistakes. And the report says the number one risk is rogue Russia, how it poses major threats to the United States, Europe, and beyond.
Now, what's interesting is they're using Maxi and then Mum, MUM. My internet is Maxi Pad, PAD. Just so this is not whatever and whatever.
The president and founder of Eurasia Group, Ian Bremmer, joins us now to discuss. Ian, good to see you.
Good morning.
So let's talk about this. In this time last year, the war between Russia and Ukraine was weeks away. Now, rogue Russia, your report is saying, is the number one threat. Why hasn't Russia's failure in the Ukraine war diminished that threat that it poses?
No, the failure is increasing the risk because Russia is becoming the world's most powerful rogue state. They are diminished dramatically as a global power. Putin couldn't even show up at the G20 because he was going to be isolated and embarrassed by all of these other world leaders. But there's no way for him to back down. It's not like he can go to the status quo ante and say, oh, my mistake. No. NATO's already expanded. Ukraine's much stronger. The Europeans have already cut them off in terms of gas flows. You got to build those pipelines someplace else. It'll take a decade. So any way you look at it, Putin is in an incredibly difficult position, but he's got 6,000 nukes. So what's he going to do? If he can't continue the war in Ukraine, he's going to take it someplace. And increasingly what that means is the war is going to hit NATO. It's going to be asymmetric attacks like espionage and like cyber attacks, pipeline, fiber. Russia.
I have never heard them speak of asymmetric attacks before. But at Constellations, this sits with me on this, like,
thinks that they've been fighting NATO for the last year. NATO has said, no, the war's in Ukraine. Increasingly, it's going to be hard to keep that in the box. That has to be the top risk that we're facing this year.
Speaking of that war in Ukraine, how do you anticipate it ending?
I wish we could anticipate it ending. Ukraine has had, the last year, their GDP has contracted by 40%. Russia's only been 4%. Russia's increasingly going to see their own economy take the kind of hit that Iran has been taking, another smaller rogue state in the Middle East, for the last decade. What that means is that Russia doesn't have a military that's capable of continuing to fight and win the war in Ukraine. Instead, they're going to be seen by NATO as the principal danger on the global stage. But that's not an end to the war.
Right.
It's an expansion of the war. I mean, at least in 2022, we've all focused on Zelensky, the bravery of 44 million Ukrainian people.
Right.
But we've kept the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
In 2023, we're not going to be able to say that anymore. It's not a cold war with Russia. It's really a hot war with Russia.
Talking about China, I mean, the main tenet of Chinese governance is focusing on its internal politics and letting other countries focus on their own internal affairs. How do you think that China, especially under Xi Jinping, will be a risk to the global geopolitical landscape if it says that it really wants to kind of do its own thing and let other countries do theirs?
You know, the funny thing is the China risk is a little bit like the Russia risk in the sense that it centers on one guy that has extraordinary amounts of power, didn't used to be true in China, doesn't have checks and balances, isn't getting great expertise the way he used to. That allows him to make big mistakes. We've already seen
surrounded by yes men?
Because he's surrounded by yes men and because he's capricious in the decisions that he makes. Zero COVID, which was the win for China for the last 2 years, suddenly it's gone. And as a consequence, China is, like it was in 2020, once again the epicenter of global COVID, with no transparency with the rest of the world about any new variants that are coming and how many cases they have and how many people are dying. Well, what happens if those sorts of health decisions get replicated in economic decisions inside China, national security decisions inside China? The reason Russia is such a risk is because Putin made the single biggest misjudgment of any leader on the global stage since the wall came down in 1989. That's the kind of leadership we're increasingly seeing in China today, but a lot more powerful China than it was back in Mao days, which the last time you saw a leader that was that powerful.
So, Ian, let me ask you quickly before we go. At number 7, you have a divided U.S. You expect polarization in the United States to grow this year, and you call the United States one of the world's most dysfunctional democracies. What are the geopolitical risks of a dysfunctional democracy that is the United States, in your words?
Thankfully, they are lower than a lot of people think. This is a don't panic risk. The fact that the United States is at the bottom of the list, even though we're the most powerful country in the world, really tells you that even when you have leaders that make big mistakes, those mistakes are constrained. People stop them from happening, whether it's...
I have a misfit problem.
The military, or judiciary, or rule of law, transparency, all of those things. The risks that are really at the top of this report this year, aging dictators and tech bros. By the way, increasingly, there's some overlap in those two categories. Those are the places where you have things that go bump in the night, and they affect all of us when we wake up.
Ian Brimmer, thank you so much. It's not just your knowledge, it's your passion as well. We appreciate you.
Hey, good to see you guys.
All right, up next,
Now here's this piece about two brothers fighting in London, which is Prince Harry and Prince William.
There's Buckingham Palace. We are following dramatic new claims of conflict inside Britain's royal family. The Guardian newspaper is detailing an alleged physical altercation between Princes Harry and William that raises new questions about their fractured relationship. The newspaper says the report is based on Prince Harry's new memoir, Spare, set to come out next week. Holly Williams is at Buckingham Palace. Holly, good morning.
Good morning. Well, some here in the UK liken Harry and Meghan's falling out with the royal family to a soap opera and say they are bored by it. But this new accusation simply cannot be ignored. It's alleged that Prince William physically attacked his brother Prince Harry during an argument about Harry's wife, Meghan.
And every single time I've tried to do it privately, there have been briefings and leakings and planting of stories against me and my wife.
In an interview with 60 Minutes airing Sunday, Harry claims he tried to resolve things with his family behind closed doors, but alleges the palace used the media against him and his wife, Meghan.
The family motto is never complain, never explain. But it's just a motto, and it doesn't really hold.
There's a lot of complaining and a lot of explaining.
And
private being done through leaks.
Through leaks.
Now, I imagine having a mind of one's own in whatever a mind is, M-I-N-D. It is a narrative. And then there's this display that the MI knows about. So now this gets very difficult when you're misfit. When you're misfit for the role and the blood type and the cosmic motherhood that you are to bring forth, and there are others that are tasked with this responsibility of making sure that you are protected and that this child you are to bring is protected. It is a lifelong journey between you and people that you've never met, trying to whatever, and knowing that you rely upon them in their seat somewhere else in order to get you out of this perhaps hot seat with these hot topics and not wanting money and pursuit of other things to impede your ability to be kept safe and enjoy some form of happiness like the rest of them do. Now, here's a story about an animal shelter, county of Los Angeles. And this little girl wants to own a unicorn. And so her mother allows her to write to the Los Angeles County, and they issue her a license.
To the Los Angeles County Department of Animal Care and Control.
I would like permission if I could have a unicorn in my backyard if I could find one.
Now, Mom, there are things over the course of our life that we explore and come to understand. What's your intention sort of behind going through the process with Madeline?
Well, Madeline's a very curious little girl. Anything that she proposes, we want to encourage and support. So when she came up to me with this idea, I thought, okay, we can do this, but let's do it through the proper measures of seeing what's required to maintain such a large animal.
Enter Marcia Mayetta, the Director of Animal Care and Control for LA County. She got Madeline's letter, and she wrote her back.
The first requirement is that she comply with all county regulations about keeping animals, that she had to feed the unicorn watermelon at least once a week because that's their favorite treat. She had to polish the unicorn's horn at least once a month with a soft cloth.
And any sparkles or glitter used on the unicorn must be non-toxic and biodegradable. Of course. Well, after agreeing to follow those rules, Madeline visited the Animal Care Center on her 7th birthday to get her unicorn license, the first ever issued by LA County.
It is bigger than me.
I think the takeaway for parents is to support your children's dreams. Don't stifle them. I think it's really important that adults do that.
When LA County shared Madeline's story on social media, it went viral, touching hearts around the world.
Now, when your child's dreams are actually nightmares and they wake up physically shaken and professing about future events and a family she has when her body is laying here with you and you can keep an eye on this body, but she has a connection and a body somewhere else in space and time. And she knows things. And then she comes back to this body and tells you about this future and all of these things she has been shown. What do you do then? It's almost like unheard of. It's paranormal science, but it's real. And there's people that dedicate their lives to learning about this. I just don't have the word construct in English because I was held in a series of rooms. Now here's how I find out about this. There's some other story today about women talking about some Mennonite colony I don't have Mennonite women with me. I had one aunt that I would use as my House of August representative because she was born in August, from a mother who was born in August, and I was born in August. That was it. I only had one representative, and now she's dead, as is my grandmother. I'm the last survivor of House of August. And I have a son that I still need to look after. So I'm listening to this morning, and there's now a movie called Women Talking. It takes place in a barn. Normally I don't gravitate to this level of production. However, this little clip, it talks about in Bolivia, these women being visited by the devil and waking up covered in blood. I was not covered in blood, but I had slashings. And then I was not visited by anybody who had a conversation with me about what they were. The doctors tried to brush it off like it was stretch marks. But it is impossible for stretch marks. Like on random selection, there was more than just stretch marks, that they all appeared in these on the bottom, so I couldn't sit, on the sides of my legs, and on my abdomen, all in one night. That's not stretch marks. There's more devious devil's work at play.
The movie, I was watching it last night. I stayed up quite
And it didn't
late.
happen for me in Bolivia. It happened in America.
And afterward, I Googled women talking true story because I needed to know what was this inspired by. And it is inspired by a true story.
Wild.
Yeah, there's an article that came out in Vice about these ghost rapes in Bolivia and about these group of women who are waking up with blood all over them, and they were being told that they'd been visited by the devil, and that basically nothing had happened. And then one of the younger daughters woke up and discovered that some of the men were tranquilizing them with cow tranquilizer, and these men were brought to prison, but because of their faith they were told that that they were going to go and bail them out, and that these women would have to forgive the men when they
Cow tranquilizer. I've heard here in like the Tia Frio 1975 common area of Farmingville, where he grew up, they had some kind of designer drug called Special K, and that was a horse tranquilizer. It wasn't a cow tranquilizer. That's what was local here. But I didn't find that out until many years thereafter, about what kind of tranquilizers they were using
when they returned. And in that time when the men went away to the city, the women held a meeting in the hayloft, and kind of and that inspired Miriam Taves, who's a Canadian who also grew up as a Mennonite, to write this amazing book.
You said that you were drawn to your character because she was difficult to understand. Why?
I don't even know what a Mennonite is. I don't. I've heard of a word named Amish, but they live more in like Dutch colony, Americana. I've heard that. We've gone to visit, I think, Mennonite. They had some TV special. I think they use electric. But I don't know the intricacies. I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking on it without some instruction from some scholar of some sort, or some learned. So it's star 1978, star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza. It's Earth, solar system, Milky Way, universe, galaxies broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.